Hey there! Why do you want to hear motivational tapes? For the ultimate success, happiness, health, and wealth, to value success and failure equally, to learn something new and be inspired, to increase knowledge about various fields, subscribe to us and stay tuned for endless motivation. God knows how to bring you out from your difficulties. You just invite Him to your difficulties.
We all seem to recognize within ourselves that we have moral culpability, as far as I can tell, because I've never met anyone who hasn't tortured themselves to a tremendous degree as a consequence of their own perceived inadequacies in relationship to the ideal. I see that people take the deepest pleasure that's possible in life in the facilitation of the development of others. I don't believe that. I believe that's wisdom to notice that, to say, well, it isn't the service to my momentary desires for pleasure or even comfort for that matter, where I'm going to find the deepest significance, life-sustaining significance that keeps me away from nihilistic hell and the desire to destroy and hurt. It's going to be something like service to the greater good, and primarily in the form of, well, other people and their longest possible term interests, and that we have not only a divine responsibility to do that, but a divine capacity to do that, that if not manifested, cripples us spiritually and physically for that matter. I mean, the ultimate significance of that remains unknowable, but I don't see any logical flaws in that proposition. I mean, I looked at the manner in which the Mesopotamians built their savior, Marduk. Marduk has eyes all the way around his head and he speaks magic words. The cosmos comes into being and disappears as a consequence of his utterances. And like there's this sense emerging in Mesopotamia as the consequence of the aggregation of all these cultures that the highest order being is extraordinarily attentive, hence the all-encircling eyes, and is capable of the deepest and most profound speech. And that's not a realization that's in any means trivial. The Mesopotamians had wars between all of their representations of their gods. And what they elevated to the highest position was this all-seeing, truth-speaking capacity that also went forward and confronted chaos and built the world as a consequence. And the influence of that set of ideas, or the derivation from the same set of ideas for the Jewish conception of Yahweh, is quite clear. And you see the same thing emerging in Greece with the building of a pantheon of gods and the proposition that something occupies the apex, something Apollonian or something of that nature. And then you see that revolution take place with the dawn of Christianity and the insistence that there's something fundamental about consciousness and spoken and the spoken truth that is constitutive of reality. And you ask yourself, well, do you believe that? And the answer is, well, you treat people like you believe that because you hold them responsible for the consequences of their utterances, and you judge their character on the basis of what they say and on whether or not they act out what they say. And so we hold each other to these standards with everything that we do, and we berate ourselves when we don't live up to them. And I don't understand how it is that we can be said not to believe it. Now, you know, there's the dogmatic element, the hypothesis, for example, that Christ is literally the Son of God. And I mean, my knowledge runs out very, very rapidly when speculating about such things, but I'm certainly seems to me that Christianity has at least been a very long conversation about what the nature of the good is, and that's spilled out into the humanities and underlies our culture, and that has very little to do with the expression of power. It's not the right lens through which to view things. It's devastating, it's wrong, it's cynical, and I think it appeals to envy and the desire to tear down.
Lobsters, like human beings, appear to become the lobster equivalent of depressed if they suffer a hierarchy defeat, and that if you give them chemicals that are roughly analogous to human antidepressants, it perks them right back up, their posture improves, and they'll go off and fight. And you know, when I first discovered that, it just blew me away. I never recovered from it. I thought, my God, really, that the continent is 350 million years of continuity in the structure of those systems. And you know, we know the serotonin system, which is the system I'm talking about, does govern your observation of where you sit in a social hierarchy, like it does for many, many animal species, and as one consequence of that, regulates your emotions, so that if it sees that you're a relatively high status creature in your local environment, then it tends to allow you to feel more positive emotion and less negative emotion. And if it sees you as a low status creature in your local comparative environment, then it does the opposite. It overwhelms you with negative emotion and suppresses positive emotion. And so, you know, and that's really bad. No one likes that. It's fundamentally, there's really nothing worse that can happen to you than that, to have those emotions adjusted in that manner, so that the incentive reward and the motivation and the positive emotion vanishes from your life. So there's nothing to be enthusiastic or excited about, and all of the negative emotions, pain, disappointment, frustration, grief, all of those terrible negative emotions are tremendously magnified. No one wants that. It's the last thing you want. Perhaps it's the last thing you want. And, you know, that's partly why people are very, let's call it, what would you say, they're willing to fight for their position in their status hierarchy, and even for the existence of the hierarchies themselves. So anyways, it is the case that human beings have a nature, and we have to contend with that nature, and so we can't just create our own values. And what Jung, especially Jung, Freud started it, but especially Jung, believed that, well, in some sense, what had happened was that we had lost the externalized religious narrative that had been projected by our imagination out onto the world. You know, you think about the constellations and the names of the constellations, and the idea that the skies were populated by gods. You know, that was an externalization of our imagination, right? Projected out into the world. We were seeing the world through our imagination, and which is exactly how we do see the world. And as we proceed, we're better able to distinguish, let's say, what's imagination from what's objective world. But that doesn't mean the imagination disappears or that it's without value, because the imagination is part of what helps us, let's say, confront the future, because we do that with our imagination, and to compose things in possibility before we realize them in actuality. So for Jung, the world of gods just collapsed within, back into the imagination, and it was into the imagination that we had to go again to discover what we had lost, to discover these lost values.